Welcome to another international podcast on Metallwoche. Today we are glad to talk to Gerald Celente from Kingston, New York once again. Gerald is one of the top trend forecasters in the world, don't laugh about me, director of the TrendsResearchInstitute and editor and publisher of the TrendsJournal. Welcome back, Gerald. Good to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Michael.
Yesterday, your Trends in the News show was all about Zizzy Juice and Jive at the Mohegan in uptown colonial Kingston. I saw that, Gerald. You said you were sick of talking about John Kerry anymore, and therefore you made this episode of Trends in the News very special. It was a great show. Great job, Gerald. Thank you very much for that. And that makes you different to many others.
Thank you. No, it's the same story over and over, and I just cannot believe that people listen to people like Kerry or any of these. You pick your president, prime minister, wherever you're from, it's the same BS lines over and over again. And I'm so disgusted with hearing John Kerry. You know, the reason they're so arrogant, and I worked as the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate as a young man, 23 years old. And I saw what goes on in politics. And the reason that these politicians speak so arrogantly to people is they think they're speaking to their staff, because the staff is always bowing down, sucking up, and trying to move their way up to the top. So it's, yes, Mr. Secretary, no, Mr. Secretary, yes, Senator, no, Senator. And so they're in a bubble, and they think that they're preaching to their kids and their staff, and they're really talking to us. They're losers, and nobody wants to call it that. So every day I go through Trends in the News, I read what they say they're going to do, and they never do it. There's not one thing that you could look at for Kerry and say, oh, there's a great success. He's a loser, and nobody wants to call him that. The Mideast peace talks, it's a piece of crap. I've said it from the beginning. All of my life I've heard about Mideast peace talks, and they're nothing. They're nothing. They're just propaganda. Then you saw Kerry, he wanted to go into Syria. He was in front of the Congress, the Senate, pushing to go into Syria last year. And now he's talking about doing it again. And now he's talking about Russia and how Russia is meddling in Ukraine. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Anybody that knows that it was the United States and the European Union that fomented the coup of Yanukovych.
Exactly. Gerald, yesterday, before we come over to the Ukraine, I saw a couple of lines what I find quite interesting, and I want to have your opinion, because it's exactly the same topic. A couple of days ago, Senator Jim Rich from Idaho said during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on the State Department budget a couple of days ago, quote, "You can't help but get the impression our foreign policy is just spinning out of control." And he was citing developments in Russia, Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, but he focused on the Russian-Ukraine situation as well. And then he said, this administration said they were going to hit the reset button with Moscow. And I can't help think that somebody hits the wrong button. Is he right, Gerald?
Well, again, even just think of that language. They're talking to us like kids. Hit the wrong button. You know what I mean? There is disaster at every level, as I said. And this has more to do with, if anybody wants a view from America of what's going on in Ukraine, chronicled as it happened, I would suggest they go to Paul Craig Roberts, paulcraigroberts.org. He was the former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan, and he's been following this step by step. The Ukraine is only a smaller part of United States foreign policy set by the neocons, the people that began the Afghan war, the Iraq war, the war on terror, the war on robbing us of our rights, and their war for United States hegemony. And what's going on in Ukraine is just another step of that. How would it be if Russia had alliances with Mexico and Canada and had ballistic missiles faced at the United States, and Russian troops, in the name of NATO, we'll call it something else, in Russia and, in Canada and in Mexico? That's what the United States has done to Russia.
Right.
They've treated Russia as though they've lost the Cold War. They're putting missile systems, they want to put them in the Czech Republic and in Poland. They're talking about putting 10,000 NATO troops in Poland. They're circling Russia when you look at the map. So this Ukraine is only one more step into weakening Russia, militarily.
Gerald, in the TrendsJournal of January 2013, you said already that a civil war is about to break out. Now everybody is talking about civil wars. On the Ukrainian discussion, we remember that on December 13, the Assistant Secretary of State mentioned that they passed over $5 billion to support non-government organizations, NGOs, over there. Now, I know that you mentioned this in your show as well, but we see the same pusher is back there. So they are all pushers, but nobody is really willing to fight, right?
Yeah, well, what they do is these legislators, just like in every other country, the people in office have the big mouths and the bad attitudes. And they start the wars, but they never fight them. They send others to go get killed,
yes.
lose their lives, their limbs, and their minds. And as we showed with the video of the, I mean, you can't make this up, the Ukrainian prime minister from the Svoboda party, and he first did the video clip of him forcing the head of the Ukrainian television station to resign as they're pushing him all around the place, this guy with a ponytail. And then you saw a few days ago at the Ukrainian government, the parliament, the same guy, you know, instigating more of that and pushing people around, literally.
Exactly, yes.
And when you look at the reason why this fight broke out in Ukraine at the parliament, is because one of the speakers, the speaker at the time, was saying, how can you criticize what's going on in Donetsk with the Russian population when the same thing happened in Kiev and you were supporting it when the people were protesting? What's the difference over here? And so the hypocrisy, of course, and that's when they attacked him. So what you have, and you have it right here in the States, and I was mentioning Kerry again, another guy shooting off his mouth, sending other people to go fight and die. These people are psychopaths and sociopaths, and nobody wants to call them what they are. Instead, they call them Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, and Mr. Prime Minister.
I think we have to take this all into a bigger picture as well. But finally, we are talking money here. When the Fed just gave the banks, once again I have to add, 2 more years to get rid of their risky loans to get under the Volcker Rule, 2 days ago the Wall Street Journal wrote that Goldman Sachs may be in the process of shutting down their Sigma X dark pool clearing. Little more than 2 weeks ago, they first announced that they would no longer play in the high-frequency trading games, and followed this by announcing they would give up their designated market maker status on the NICE. Gerald, you mentioned a couple of times in the past that the house of cards is coming down. Does Goldman Sachs maybe know that there could be another Lehman Brothers moment in the offering, and the wrong house is going to make the wrong bet? Yes, and what you talked about with the easing of the Volcker Rule, let me just back up on that. There was no need for a Volcker Rule. All they had to do was reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act in its entirety. The Volcker Rule is just a lot of fluff and doing very little, and as you mentioned, they're holding back some of it for 2 years. What this is also allowing to happen, it's allowing more of the hedge funds, the pension groups, and the others to make heavy speculations
in markets, but they're not covered by any kind of reserves. So they, unlike a bank, they don't have to have anything in the bank, and they could just keep betting away. And that's what they also did by easing these rules that was supposed to be put into place. So in effect, what they've done is they've created another speculative market that's unregulated. And the speculative market will continue to grow at bubble proportions as long as interest rates continue to stay low. So you have the mergers and acquisitions, all of these hedge fund and venture capitalist activities going on. You're seeing the mergers, for example, now of the greatest cement companies, so more monopolies and more consolidation because money's so cheap. So they're building a bigger bubble. I also would look at PIMCO. And the reason being, as you know, they're the largest bond traders in the world. The reason being is that they're getting a lot of negative press lately. And when this kind of thing happens, they're usually a target. Somebody's angry someplace at a deal done somewhere or many deals. So I would look at PIMCO too. I believe that a financial house is going to collapse. And that is what's going to cause another run of stimulating. They will blame the collapse on the need to keep interest rates continually low and for another round of quantitative easing. They'll call it something else. They'll use a different excuse. Again, I don't think anybody out there denies the fact that the only reason, and you can name whether it's China, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US, whether it's Japan, they're all dumping cheap money into the system. And once that interest rates go up, money becomes expensive, this false recovery fails. So when they have a failure by a big group, a Lehman Brothers event, for example, I think that's going to be their excuse to continue to juice up the economy, continue to throw cheap money into it, and that's when you're going to see the next gold bull run.
That's a topic what I will discuss with you a little bit later. It's funny, when we watch these developments, you heard that over here, the ECB is now considering a QE program as well. They talk about unconventional measures of stimulus which could involve 1 billion euros. But, Gerald, funny enough, when the news hit the wire, the euro was not getting weaker. It's actually getting even stronger to the dollar. The dollar is losing against the British pound, the Japanese yen, the Swiss francs, the Australian dollar as well. And Greece today was able to return to the bond market, believe it or not, getting 3 billion euros instead of 2.5 for a 5-year note because it was 8 times oversubscribed and yielding 4.95%. My question, Gerald, is the petrodollar already in big trouble? As Jim Rickards and Jim Sinclair are pointing out, Sinclair spoke of a nuclear option for Putin at hand in a financial war should he decide to accept all other currencies than the US dollar for oil and gas. Do we underestimate the danger for the dollar here, Gerald?
You know, I don't know, because all the other situations are weak as well. So, you know, where do you go to? I mean, you look at the yuan, what is it? It only accounts for, what, about 2% of the trading on the world exchanges. I think the dollar will find strength again when they raise interest rates. And then when you look at really how much, you know, Russia is dealing with, I mean, what is the size of their GDP? Well, by the way, I very, very, very much respect Jim Sinclair, and he's the tops in commodities when I look at him. You know, I mean, he's been around a long time and knows a lot. I'm just looking at it a little bit differently in the sense that I see instability everywhere. I don't see a safe haven currency. I believe the United States dollar will have a very, very long and hard fall. But as I said, I think it's going to be long. I don't think it's going to be sudden. And the reason being is that where is the fallback position?
I agree on this, and there are a lot of discussions out there because Jim Rickards is publishing his new book, Death of Money, and he's talking about the special drawing rights which could come into play. Maybe that is something for the longer run, but I find it quite funny because if you listen to European fund managers here, bankers around here, they're all surprised that the euro is strong. They expect the euro at 130, even 120, and they're all a little bit surprised about this action. When we watch all this together and coming over to gold, I think this house of cards, as you called it, and the Fed changing course again, that could be the spirit for gold to take out the 1475 level, because I know you watch this as well. We both don't give any financial advice, but as long as we don't take out this level on gold, I think we are stucking sideways here, right?
I agree with you. And as I've said before, gold has, to me, I could see gold going down to the downside risk being $1,000 an ounce. Anything can happen. I don't see it, but I think that's the downside. But when you look at what the upside is, it's enormous. There is no recovery. Again, you mentioned what's going on, and it's all done on speculation. Like you were talking about the Greek bonds.
Yes.
This is all speculative money. It's cheap money. What are they talking about? Negative interest rates in the ECB now? And this whole lie about deflation. Oh, yeah, everything is really inexpensive. I've noticed it over here. Our electric bills, Michael, in 1 month have gone up 38%. Food is going through the roof. Everything cost more. Oh, maybe petrol went down a little bit, a couple of pennies. But then, of course, the taxes go up. The costs of everything go up. And they're talking about deflation. That's the big lie.
We feel the same over here. So the electricity bills are going up. They are just changing once again on the energy sector here over in Germany. So for the customers, for the clients, the end clients, it is getting more expensive. But if you watch the overall figures, Frank always said when he's on TV, that is the official data, believe it or not. But if you hear this, everyone is preaching we have to protect for deflation. I think it is changing in the background, but it could be misleading for people, the fight for deflation. Is that something what you have in your mind as well when you think about that, because the economy is not as strong as they are trying to tell us, that there could be a sudden move by the Fed to change course again?
Yes, and that's why they're playing the deflation card, that they have to do something to stimulate. They're making up another story. That's all it is. It's another story. I believe, as you said, they're talking about quantitative easing, but they have a nicer name for it now over in Europe. And we're going to see Yellenomics. That's what they'll call it over here. And we see the disaster of Abenomics over in Japan. All of that stimulus, all it did was juice the equity markets. That's all this is doing anywhere. So it's not helping the overall economy. I heard David Stockman, the former budget director under Reagan, and he was on one of the shows, and he's against, of course, the quantitative easing as well. And they said to him, what would have happened if we didn't do it? He said, the same thing that you have now. He said, the only people it's helped are the banks and the speculators. The economy would be exactly where it is right now without the quantitative easing and all of this money that went to enrich the richest.
Gerald, for the last question, just let us come back to Ukraine and how this thing could develop up from here. Do you have anything on your mind? What are you seeing from your catbird seat?
The way we see it is that there's going to be more and more of an anti-Russian propaganda move, and a new Cold War has already begun. By the way, it happened before the unrest in Ukraine, the anti-Russian sentiments. Before the Sochi Olympics, virtually every day there was a negative story coming out about what was going on over there. They're killing all those stray dogs to clean up the area. Oh, those homophobes, those Russians. Look at the water, you can't drink it, it's yellow. They're not ready with the hotel rooms. Oh, terror strikes. 57% of Americans believed there would be a terrorist strike in Sochi during the Olympics. What I'm saying is the propaganda mill had been running strongly before Ukraine. What I see happening here is that people are missing something very important, that you don't poke the bear. This isn't Iraq, Iran. This isn't, certainly not Libya. This is Russia. If Napoleon couldn't beat them, if Hitler couldn't beat them, do you think Hollande, Obama, and Cameron are going to beat him? And this
Definitely not.
And he's a fighter. It's a different mentality. Fighters are different. These other guys, you know, they're the Eton boys, the Harvard and Yale crew. It's a very different mentality. So what we see happening economically, this could, you know, we're talking about deflation. If Russia feels real pressure from sanctions and their economy starts suffering, you're going to see that gas and oil tap really slow down. And that's going to affect Europe dramatically, since over 30% of its gas and you know, its energy is coming from Russia. This could really have a very, very strong effect. It could have the kind of effect that would happen back in 1973 with the Gulf energy crisis. So they're playing with fire. And unfortunately, this could escalate out of control, particularly when you see the people that are out of control already in Ukraine. That is not a sovereign government. It's a government that's been put in place with a coup. It's being run and manipulated by the United States according to the audio tapes that everyone heard of Assistant Secretary of State Nuland and Ukraine Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt.
Yes.
Planning the overthrow of Yanukovych. So what I'm saying is it's a very destabilized situation, and I fear that what's going on in Ukraine could spread over its borders.
No, I agree on this, Gerald, and not only to blame the US, but if you hear the EU here or Europe, which are negotiating with some guys, and I can't call it a parliament, with some guys who are not elected, and they make a new treaty with them. I get the feeling here in Germany and probably in Europe as well, people don't have this on their minds, what's going on. I think they're not interested in it, but I think that there's really, really big development in a direction which we both know is not a democratic way.
Not at all. It's not democratic at all. Oh, and I forgot Rasmussen, the head of NATO, you know, talking about expanding NATO, and the lies shooting out of his mouth, yes, saying that the Crimea elections were held under a barrel of a gun. No such thing happened. There were international observers. Over 80% of the people turned out to vote. So almost 97% of those that turned out to vote voted to leave Ukraine. And of course, the history. Well, Russia has been in Crimea since 1783. You know, so no, it wasn't an invasion as it's being said and painted by the media. So the important element of this is the underlying currents of how populations are swayed through propaganda to dislike those that they are setting up, so that when the flashpoint happens and war is ready, the public has been primed to follow their leaders.
Gerald, that was only a small piece what you do every day in Trends in the News and what you do in the TrendsJournal as well, where you publish quarterly your view and the view of Paul Craig Roberts, for example, and others who help you there. Gerald, as usual, if somebody wants to subscribe to the TrendsJournal, where do they have to go to?
TrendsJournal.com, and of course we have a German edition as well. And we make it available to everyone, Michael. We know that people are having difficult financial times, so there's a discount request page. It's inexpensive to begin with, but we make it available to everyone because I could say with all truth and belief that it's the only magazine in the world where you'll read history before it happens.
Gerald, please keep on doing your good job. That was Gerald Celente, director of the Trend Research Institute and editor and publisher of the TrendsJournal, connected to us from Kingston, New York. Thank you very much for joining us on Metallwoche again, Gerald.
Thank you, Michael.